What if one confession destroys your perfect future forever? What if the love you've hidden for years is the only thing that can save you from a life that was never yours? And what if the moment you finally speak the truth doesn't just free your heart but shatters the empire your family spent decades building? Brandon Harrington stood on the marble terrace of his family's Hamptons estate, the Atlantic wind tugging at his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. At 28, he was the golden heir of Harrington Global, the conglomerate that controlled everything from shipping ports to tech startups. Tonight was supposed to be the final rehearsal dinner before tomorrow's engagement announcement to Sophia Langford, the only daughter of the Langford shipping dynasty. Their union would merge two titans and secure the future his father had mapped out since Brandon was in diapers. But Brandon's hands trembled as he clutched the stem of a champagne flute. Across the lawn, Kayden Matthews laughed at something one of the caterers said, his easy smile lighting up the evening like it always did. Kayden wasn't supposed to be here. He was a high school literature teacher from Brooklyn, the man Brandon had fallen for 2 years ago in a quiet bookstore on a rainy afternoon. Their love had been stolen moments. Late-night drives up the coast, whispered promises in hotel rooms, the kind of connection that made Brandon feel alive for the first time. "Brandon, darling, you look like you're about to faint," his mother, Eleanor, murmured, gliding up in a silk gown the color of pearls. She adjusted his tie with the practiced touch of someone who had smoothed over 1,000 scandals. "Sophia just arrived. Smile. This is your future." He forced the corners of his mouth upward, but his gaze kept drifting to Kayden, who had slipped into the crowd wearing the simple navy blazer Brandon had bought him last Christmas. Kayden caught his eye and gave the smallest nod, the signal they had agreed on. Tonight, no more hiding. The string quartet shifted into a waltz. Guests mingled under crystal chandeliers that cast warm light across the ballroom. Brandon's father, Victor Harrington, clapped him on the shoulder with the grip of a man who closed million-dollar deals before breakfast. "One more night, son. Tomorrow the papers will call it the wedding of the decade. You're doing the family proud." Brandon swallowed the bile rising in his throat. Proud. The word tasted like ash. 4 years he had played the role, board meetings, charity galas, polite dates with women his father approved. All while his real life lived in the shadows with Kayden. He thought of the nights Kayden had held him through panic attacks after arguments with Victor, the way Kayden's voice could quiet every storm inside him. Love like that didn't deserve to stay secret. The microphone crackled as the MC announced the happy couple. Sophia stepped forward in a champagne gown, radiant and expectant, linking her arm through Brandon's. Cameras flashed. Laughter rippled. Brandon's pulse hammered in his ears. He looked at Kayden one last time. The teacher's eyes held steady courage and a quiet plea. "You don't have to do this alone." Brandon stepped up to the mic before anyone could stop him. His voice rang clear across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. But there's something I need to say before tomorrow's ceremony." The room hushed. Victor's face tightened. Sophia's smile faltered. "I can't marry Sophia. I'm in love with someone else. His name is Kayden Matthews, and he's the man I want to spend my life with." Gasps exploded like fireworks. Glasses clattered. Victor Harrington's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Brandon, what the hell are you doing?" But Brandon kept his eyes on Kayden, who had stepped forward through the stunned crowd. For the first time in years, the weight on Brandon's chest lifted. The confession was out. The perfect future his family had built was already cracking. And he had never felt more terrified or more free. The night descended into pandemonium faster than anyone could have predicted. Security tried to contain the press that had somehow gotten wind of the drama and were now swarming the gates. Sophia's father, Richard Langford, stormed across the ballroom, his face purple with rage. "This is a business arrangement, Harrington, not some soap opera." Victor grabbed Brandon's arm and yanked him into the private study off the main hall, slamming the oak door so hard the portraits on the wall rattled. Eleanor followed, her heels clicking sharply. "Victor, calm down. We can spin this." "Spin this?" Victor roared. his voice echoing off the mahogany bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes no one ever read. Our son just announced he's gay in front of 200 of the most influential people on the East Coast. The merger papers are signed tomorrow morning. Langford will pull out before breakfast. Brandon stood tall, Kayden beside him now, their fingers brushing in silent solidarity. Dad, I'm not announcing anything new. I'm finally telling the truth. I've been in love with Kayden for 2 years. Sophia deserves someone who can give her a real marriage, not a business contract. Sophia had slipped into the room behind them, eyes glistening but chin lifted. Brandon, I suspected. But hearing it like this, she pressed a hand to her chest. I thought we were friends at least. We are, Brandon said softly. That's why I couldn't keep lying to you. Victor paced like a caged lion. Friends? This isn't about friendship. This is about legacy. My father built Harrington Global from nothing. I expanded it across continents. And you're throwing it away for some teacher from Brooklyn? He spat the word like an insult. Kayden's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet, letting Brandon lead. That was one of the things Brandon loved most about him, the quiet strength that never needed to shout. Eleanor touched Victor's sleeve. We'll issue a statement. Say it was a misunderstanding, stress, anything. The board can handle the Langfords. No, Brandon's voice was steel. No more lies. I'm done pretending. If the company suffers, then it suffers. I'd rather lose everything than lose myself. The words hung in the air. Victor stared at his son as if seeing him for the first time. Outside, the party had dissolved into frantic whispers and camera clicks. Brandon felt the first cracks of doubt in his father's eyes. Not anger alone, but something deeper, like grief for the son he thought he knew. Kayden squeezed his hand once, grounding him. We should go, he murmured. Let them talk. As they stepped back into the fray, Brandon realized the night was only beginning. The family that had defined his entire life was fracturing, and he had lit the match. But for the first time, the future felt like his own to shape. The drive back to Kayden's small apartment in Brooklyn felt like crossing into another universe. The city lights blurred past the car windows while Brandon's phone buzzed nonstop. Board members, cousins, even old college friends who had seen the clips already circulating online. He silenced it and leaned his head against the cool glass. Kayden kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on Brandon's knee. You did it. You actually did it. His voice carried a mix of awe and worry. How do you feel? Like I jumped off a cliff and haven't hit the water yet. Brandon laughed, but it came out shaky. I keep waiting for the regret to crash in, but it hasn't. I just feel light. Terrified, but light. They climbed the narrow stairs to the third-floor walk-up, the familiar scent of Kayden's books and fresh coffee wrapping around Brandon like a blanket. Inside, Kayden poured 2 glasses of cheap red wine and they collapsed onto the worn leather couch. Tomorrow the lawyers will descend, Brandon said, staring at the ceiling. Dad already texted that the board is calling an emergency meeting. The Langfords are threatening to sue for breach of contract. Kayden set his glass down. Then we face it. Together. I didn't fall in love with a Harrington heir. I fell in love with you. The guy who quotes poetry when he thinks no one's listening and who cries at dog rescue videos. Brandon turned to him, eyes searching. You never asked me to choose. Even when I kept canceling plans because of family dinners or when I couldn't hold your hand in public. Why? Because I knew the cage you were in wasn't built by you. I waited for the day you'd decide to unlock it yourself. Kayden's fingers traced the line of Brandon's jaw. But I won't lie, it hurt sometimes. Watching you smile for cameras while I waited in the shadows. The honesty stung, but Brandon needed it. He pulled Kayden closer, their foreheads touching. I'm sorry. For every time I made you feel like a secret. They talked until the sky lightened, mapping out the weeks ahead. Kayden had his own battles. His conservative parents back in Ohio still didn't know about Brandon, and the school where he taught had a strict, family values reputation. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was theirs. Morning brought the storm. Brandon's phone exploded with notifications the moment he turned it on. Headlines screamed, Harrington Heirs gay bombshell rocks billion-dollar merger. Stock prices for Harrington Global dipped 3% before the market even opened. Victor left 3 voicemails, each angrier than the last. Brandon met his father at the corporate headquarters on 5th Avenue. The boardroom felt colder than usual, the long table lined with stern faces. Victor didn't waste time. You have 48 hours to issue a retraction. Say you were drunk, say it was a prank, say anything. Then marry Sophia and we'll fix this. I'm not retracting anything, Brandon answered evenly. I'm gay, Dad. I've always been gay. And Kayden is the best thing that's ever happened to me. One board member cleared his throat. The Langfords are already pulling financing. We're looking at a $30 million hit by close of business. Victor slammed his palm on the table. Then you fix it, Brandon. You owe this family that much. The words landed like a punch. Oh. Brandon had spent his life owing excellence, owing loyalty, owing the continuation of a name. For the first time he saw the chain clearly. I owe myself first, he said quietly. If that costs the company, I'll walk away. I have savings. I can start over. The room went silent. Victor's face paled. In that moment Brandon glimpsed the fear behind the fury. Fear that the empire might actually crumble. Fear that the son he had molded was slipping away. Outside the building, Kayden waited on the sidewalk, 2 coffees in hand. How bad? Bad enough that I might be unemployed by next week. Brandon managed a smile. But I'm free. They walked through Central Park, leaves crunching underfoot, and Brandon felt the first real shift inside him. The boy who had hidden in boardrooms was becoming the man who chose his own path. Yet the guilt lingered. Guilt toward Sophia, whose future he had upended. Guilt toward his mother who had always tried to soften his father's edges. That evening Eleanor called. Her voice was softer than Victor's. Your father is hurting, but he's also thinking. Give him time. And Brandon, I'm proud of you for saying it out loud. I always knew, a mother sees these things. The words cracked something open in Brandon's chest. Not everyone was lost. Kayden cooked pasta in the tiny kitchen while Brandon watched, realizing how much he had missed ordinary nights. We need a plan, Kayden said, stirring sauce. Your family isn't the only one watching. My principal called today. Parents are complaining about the teacher in the news. Brandon set the table. Then we face that too. No more hiding for either of us. As they ate, Brandon felt the weight of the day settle into something manageable. The chaos was real, but so was the man sitting across from him. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a script written by someone else. It felt like a blank page they would fill together. The weeks that followed blurred into a whirlwind of headlines, lawyer meetings, and quiet nights that kept Brandon grounded. Harrington Global's stock stabilized after an emergency press conference where Victor vaguely spoke of personal matters and family support. But the damage was done. The Langford merger collapsed, and whispers spread through the old money circles that the Harringtons were slipping. Brandon moved most of his things into Kayden's apartment, trading penthouse views for a view of a brick wall and the distant rumble of the subway. The simplicity felt revolutionary. Mornings started with Kayden's terrible coffee and shared showers where no one worried about who might see. But the internal storm raged on. Brandon woke at 3 a.m. Some nights, heart pounding with the same question. Had he destroyed everything for nothing? Kayden would pull him close, murmuring, You're not destroying. You're rebuilding. One afternoon, Sophia showed up at the apartment unannounced. She looked thinner, but her eyes were clear. I needed to see you in person, she said, accepting the tea Kayden offered. Not the version in the tabloids. They sat at the small kitchen table. Brandon braced for anger, but Sophia only sighed. I was raised the same way you were, duty first. I thought I could do the marriage thing, play the role. But hearing you say his name that night, it hurt, but it also woke me up. I called off my own side of the deal. My father's furious. but I told him I'd rather be single than a prop. Brandon reached across the table. I'm sorry I blindsided you. You did what I was too scared to do, she admitted. I'm seeing someone now, someone real. So thank you in a weird way. After she left, Kayden wrapped his arms around Brandon from behind. See? One truth can ripple outward and free more than just you. Yet not every ripple was kind. Victor summoned Brandon to the family home in Connecticut. The drive up was tense, Kayden riding shotgun for moral support though he stayed in the car. Victor waited in the study, alone this time. I've lost 3 major clients because of your little stunt, he said without preamble. The board wants me to step down as chairman unless I can guarantee stability. Brandon stood his ground. Then maybe it's time for new leadership. I'm not coming back to the company, Dad. I've resigned effective immediately. Victor's shoulders sagged. For the first time Brandon saw age in his father's face. The man who had once seemed invincible now looked exhausted. You're my only son. Everything I built was for you. It was never for me, Brandon answered gently. It was for the name. I love you, Dad. But I can't live inside your dream anymore. They didn't hug. Victor simply nodded once. A curt dismissal that still carried decades of disappointment. Brandon walked out feeling hollow yet lighter. Outside, Kayden waited. How'd it go? About as expected. But I think he heard me. That night they drove to a quiet beach on Long Island, sitting on the hood of the car under a blanket of stars. Kayden pulled out a small notebook. I've been writing something. For us. He read a short poem about 2 men learning to build a new legacy from the ruins of old ones. Brandon listened, tears slipping down his cheeks. Not from sadness, but from the beauty of being truly seen. Back in the city, new challenges emerged. Kayden's school placed him on administrative leave pending a values review. Parents had petitioned, calling him a bad influence after the viral video. Brandon watched Kayden pace the apartment, frustration etched in every line of his body. I've taught those kids for 6 years, Kayden said. Now I'm the guy who broke up a billionaire wedding. We'll fight it, Brandon promised. I'll hire the best education lawyer. You're not losing your job over my truth. They spent evenings drafting statements, gathering letters from colleagues and former students. Brandon discovered a new purpose, using his connections not for power but for protection. He reached out to an old classmate who now ran an LGBTQ advocacy group, and soon support poured in. One evening, Brandon's younger cousin, Mia, called from California. Uncle Victor is telling everyone you're going through a phase. But I told him he's wrong. I'm proud of you, Bran. And I want to meet Kayden. Small bridges began forming. Eleanor started texting Kayden recipes, a quiet olive branch. Even Victor sent a single message. The board voted to keep me. For now. Don't make me regret it. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Through it all, Brandon felt himself changing. The man who once measured worth by stock prices now measured it by the peace in Kayden's eyes when they cooked dinner together. He started volunteering at a youth center for LGBTQ teens, sharing his story in small groups. The kids looked at him like he was proof that survival was possible. Kayden watched the transformation with quiet pride. You're becoming the person you were always meant to be. Brandon pulled him into a slow dance in their tiny living room. Only because I finally stopped running from him. The path ahead remained uncertain. Legal battles, family reconciliation, career pivots. But for the first time Brandon wasn't afraid of the unknown. He had Kayden, and together they were writing a story no one could dictate. Months slipped by, and the initial media frenzy faded into a steady background hum. Brandon launched a small consulting firm focused on ethical corporate governance. Ironic, given his family's history, but clients came because they trusted his integrity. Kayden won his job back after the school board reviewed the petitions and found no wrongdoing. The support letters from parents who had changed their minds proved decisive. Still, the emotional aftershocks lingered. Brandon's relationship with Victor remained strained. They spoke only through lawyers at first, finalizing Brandon's severance and the transfer of some trust funds. Then one crisp autumn afternoon Victor called directly. "Meet me at the old boathouse," he said. No hello, no preamble. Brandon drove up alone this time. The boathouse on the Connecticut property had been their secret spot when he was a boy, where Victor had taught him to tie fishing knots and, later, to negotiate deals. Now it felt like neutral ground. Victor stood at the edge of the dock, hands in his pockets. "I've been reading the reports on your new firm. Not bad." Brandon waited. "I was wrong to think I could force you into my mold," Victor continued, eyes on the water. "Your mother reminded me that I married her against my own father's wishes. Said I was being a hypocrite." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "She's usually right." Brandon felt the knot in his chest loosen. "I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't hurt me. You scared me. The company almost lost everything because of one night." Victor turned. "But we survived. And you look different. Lighter." "I am." Brandon stepped closer. "Kayden and I are moving in together officially. I'd like you to meet him properly. Not as the man who ruined the merger, but as the person who makes me happy." Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Bring him for Thanksgiving. Your mother's already planning the menu." It wasn't a grand apology, but it was progress. Brandon drove home with tears in his eyes, the kind that came from relief rather than pain. Kayden celebrated the news by booking a weekend getaway to a cabin in the Adirondacks. No Wi-Fi, just them, the woods, and long talks by the fire. On the second night, Kayden knelt by the hearth and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we're not rushing anything, but I've carried this for months. Brandon Harrington, will you marry me? Not for any empire, not for any headline. Just because I can't imagine a life without you in it." Brandon's answer was immediate, pulling Kayden up into a kiss that tasted of wood smoke and promise. The ring was simple platinum, engraved with the coordinates of the bookstore where they had first met. Back in New York, they told their closest circle. Mia flew in from California to celebrate. Sophia sent a congratulatory bouquet with a note. "To the courage we both found." Even some board members from Harrington Global reached out privately, offering quiet well wishes. Yet old wounds reopened when Kayden's parents finally learned the full story through a distant relative. They arrived in Brooklyn unannounced, faces tight with disapproval. "We raised you in the church," his mother said. "This isn't the life we prayed for." Kayden stood firm beside Brandon. "This is the life that makes me who I am. I love him. If that costs me your blessing, I'll mourn it, but I won't change it." The conversation ended in tears and slammed doors, but Kayden didn't crumble. That night he curled against Brandon and whispered, "I used to think love meant choosing between them and me. Now I know it means choosing myself first so I can love everyone better." Brandon held him tighter, understanding that their journey wasn't only about coming out. It was about growing up. They attended couples counseling to navigate the family fractures, learning to set boundaries without burning bridges. One quiet Sunday, Brandon visited his mother alone. Eleanor served tea in the sunroom and said softly, "Your father asked me to give you this." She handed him an old leather journal. Inside were notes Victor had written over the years, plans for the company, but also private entries about wanting his son to be happy. The last page read, "If he finds love that makes him brave, then I've succeeded more than I knew." Brandon closed the book, throat tight. Healing wasn't linear, but it was happening. Meanwhile, Kayden started an after-school reading club for LGBTQ youth at his school. Brandon volunteered every Friday, sharing stories of resilience. Watching the teenagers laugh and open up reminded him why the chaos had been worth it. Their wedding was small and intentional, held at the Adirondack cabin the following spring. Only close friends, Eleanor, Mia, and surprisingly Victor attended. He shook Kayden's hand and said gruffly, "Take care of my son." It was the closest thing to acceptance Brandon had ever received from him. Under blooming dogwoods, Brandon and Kayden exchanged vows they had written together. No grand declarations, just promises to keep choosing each other through every storm. Life after the wedding settled into a rhythm Brandon had never known existed. They bought a modest brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, close enough to Kayden's school and Brandon's consulting office for morning walks together. The house filled with books, plants, and the laughter of friends who dropped by unannounced. Brandon's firm grew steadily, taking on clients who wanted to build inclusive workplaces. He spoke at conferences about authentic leadership, always careful to credit Kayden for teaching him what real courage looked like. Kayden published his first poetry collection, dedicated simply to be the man who taught me home isn't a place. Yet growth demanded more reckoning. Victor suffered a mild heart scare the following winter, and Brandon rushed to the hospital. In the sterile room, father and son sat in silence until Victor finally spoke. "I almost lost you before I ever really knew you. Don't let me make that mistake again." They began monthly dinners, awkward at first, then easier. Victor asked genuine questions about Kayden's teaching, about their life. Eleanor beamed at every small step forward. Kayden's parents remained distant, but his younger sister started visiting, bringing her kids who adored Uncle Brandon. The ripples continued. One spring evening, they received an invitation neither expected: the Langford family's annual gala. Sophia had married a woman she met through her new nonprofit work. The note read, "Come celebrate real love with us." They attended, walking the same ballroom where everything had shattered 2 years earlier. This time the chandeliers felt warm instead of oppressive. Sophia hugged them both. "Look at us, two couples who refused the script, dancing with Kayden under the same lights that had once witnessed his confession." Brandon felt the full circle close. The boy who had trembled at the microphone was now a man who knew exactly who he was and who he loved. Challenges still arose. A conservative think tank tried to smear Brandon's firm, dredging up old headlines. Instead of hiding, they faced it together with transparency and community support. The backlash backfired, bringing even more clients who valued honesty. Kayden's school promoted him to department head, citing his inclusive programs as a model. Brandon watched the ceremony with pride swelling in his chest. On their second anniversary, they returned to the Hamptons. Not the estate, but a small beach cottage they rented for the weekend. Walking the shore at dusk, Brandon stopped and turned to Kayden. "Remember the night I almost married someone else?" Kayden smiled. "Hard to forget. I used to think that confession was the hardest thing I'd ever do. Now I realize the hardest part was believing I deserved the life that came after." Brandon took both of Kayden's hands. "Thank you for waiting, for believing in me when I didn't." They stood there as waves whispered against the sand, two men who had rebuilt their world from the pieces of the old one. The empire Brandon once feared losing had been replaced by something stronger. A partnership rooted in truth, resilience, and the quiet daily choice to keep loving. Years later, looking back felt like reading a novel they had lived page by page. Brandon and Kayden adopted a little boy named Luca, whose bright laughter filled their brownstone with new meaning. Victor doted on his grandson in ways he had never managed with his own son, and Eleanor became the grandmother who baked cookies and told stories of second chances. Kayden's parents eventually softened, attending Luca's kindergarten graduation with tentative pride. The family they had chosen and the family they had inherited finally overlapped in messy, beautiful ways. Brandon sold his consulting firm at a profit and began mentoring young LGBTQ entrepreneurs, paying forward the support he had received. Kayden continued teaching, his poetry now taught in colleges as examples of modern resilience. One crisp October evening they stood on the terrace of the old Harrington estate, now used for charity events, watching Luca chase fireflies. Victor joined them, cane in hand but eyes clear. "You did better than I ever could," he said quietly. "You built something that can't be taken away." Brandon clasped his father's shoulder. "We both did, Dad. Just in different ways." Later, as Luca slept upstairs, Brandon and Kayden sat by the fireplace with mugs of cocoa. Kayden rested his head on Brandon's shoulder. "If someone had told me on that bookstore day that this would be our life, I wouldn't have believed them." Brandon kissed his temple. "I wouldn't have believed I was brave enough to claim it." The journey had never been about perfection. It had been about the messy, painful, glorious process of becoming. From the shattering confession to the quiet strength of everyday love, they had learned that real legacy wasn't measured in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the courage to live authentically and the grace to help others do the same. And in the end, that was the greatest merger of all. In writing this story, I saw how one act of courage can ripple outward, healing fractures we never knew existed, while revealing the strength we always carried inside. Brandon and Kayden's journey reminds us that authenticity isn't the destruction of our past, but the foundation for a future built on truth. Love, when chosen freely, doesn't just survive pressure, it transforms it into something unbreakable. The real victory lies not in winning battles with the world, but in making peace with ourselves along the way.